Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. It's German Grand Prix week in MotoGP, and Jack Miller's future has now been officially confirmed. Also, the Isle of Man TT is over for another year, but not without controversy. And World Superbikes was in action at the weekend, once again, putting on a spectacular show. All that and more coming up on today's podcast. The recording date is Monday, the 13th of June. My name is Harry Benjamin. Joining me as ever is Crash's MotoGP editor Pete McLaren, and of course former Grand Prix rider and British champion Keith Huewen. And Keith, you're fresh back from the Isle of Man, aren't you? From seeing the TT, what was it like out there? The atmosphere. I mean, it's a historic event, isn't it? And one that hasn't been on for the last year or so, and so everyone's flocked to it this year.
3 years effectively that nothing's been going on obviously on the island. It's a beautiful, beautiful place. The Isle of Man is a beautiful place to visit, whether there's bikes going on or not. That bit done and dusted. Obviously, you go there with some trepidation. I go there with some trepidation because you always know something is going to happen that is negative, as well as all the fun and games of the fair. I mean, it's a fantastic event. You know, the tradition behind it and the actual event itself. And I have to say that every single one of those guys that manages to do that course properly is an absolute hero. It really is a special event. To watch Peter Hickman, whose dad I used to race with, Dave, ride that place the way he rides it is magnificent. He is just quality, there's no doubt. And most of the guys in behind him are as well. But of course, 5 deaths this year. And I say so far because there's one sidecar guy that's sort of just hanging in there at the moment, is horrendous, absolutely horrendous. I mean, can you imagine any other sport where you had 5 deaths during the course of it and it would continue to run? I don't think it probably would be. I think the Isle of Man, it's a sad comeback for the Isle of Man, even though it's been a great event. But in this day of box ticking, I think the Isle of Man authorities are going to have to do a fair bit of that over the next few months to try and make sure that they at least be seen to be trying to mitigate what has happened. Proper analysis, a proper look into how these things happened. The 2 solo deaths, I have to say, were unfortunate. The 2, but the sidecar deaths were something that on a part of the track that it doesn't seem to be compatible for the sidecars. Ago's Leap is literally Ago's Leap. There's an aero issue. There's a balance issue with obviously 2 riders in what is a slightly awkward machine anyway to ride in normal circumstances, let alone in something where you've got such a lot of changes going on. And it was very, very windy as well, so you don't know whether that had anything to do with it. But I think the Isle of Man authorities will have to look at things like training, who's how old these guys were, how much experience they had on the track, whether sidecars aerodynamically are not really compatible at the moment for some reason or another. I have no clue whether that is fact or fiction. So there's quite a lot that they've got to look at, but they've got to be seen to be doing it, and they've got to be seen to be doing it in a correct way. I think with social media and the way that we all have access nowadays, it used to be the case at the Isle of Man that somebody was killed and you never really heard about it. Nothing really got off the island. It was just, I won't say swept under the carpet because that's disrespectful, but certainly it was kept quiet. Now it isn't. It's for everyone to see. So now the Isle of Man authorities have got that issue where they've got to try and make it work. Interestingly, Stuart Higgs was, you may remember a tweet that Stuart Higgs put out about, he was terrified at a bike that had gone bang over the mountain because of the gaps between marshals and the marshal posts and access to the track. And, he was comparing it obviously with how strict they are on a short circuit and how they can jump across any particular problem really, really quickly. And he he wasn't being critical, I don't think, of the Isle of Man. I think genuinely he was terrified at the fact that you couldn't check to see how much oil had been laid down during that session because there was so much of a gap between it. But he came up with some very interesting technical innovations that they're trying out in BSB, where you can light up the dashboard with a yellow flag or a flashing light or whatever it was. There was an issue coming down Bray Hill on the Glencrushery Road. A football, whether it was kicked or whether it blew out of a front garden, was rolling down the racing line on live television, and through came motorcycles 150, 60 miles an hour. Now, if they'd had this innovation that Stuart Higgs was talking about, on the bike, then they would have been able to flick on a flashing yellow on the dash of the approaching machines well in advance of that sector. They've got light panels now, like we have at MotoGP, that flashes through. But 30, like I say, the size of a racetrack, 37.75 miles. I mean, just absorb that for a second. That is a massively long way around. I went round the track yesterday before I came home. It seems to take forever. I know it only takes them guys 15 minutes or whatever it is, but for everybody else, it's a bloody long way around. And the distance between marshalling posts and sector marshals and so on and so forth is just naturally bigger than it is in some other places. So there are innovations that could be brought in. And rather than, it's quite funny, when I was looking to do an interview with Stuart Higgs, I went to the press office at the back of the grandstand and asked if they'd got an office that we could do this interview in. And I said it's with Stuart Higgs. It actually looked like I'd farted in the office when I said that. They really didn't seem to be so keen. But I think Higgsy had got some quite good ideas, and it's positive that he's taking away something from the Isle of Man to go back to BSB and offering up ideas to the Isle of Man that will enhance that event as well. I think sometimes we get stuck in this mold of people being for or against a circuit or a situation, and we shouldn't. We should work together to try and make that better. I'm 100% against things being banned. I always have been. I mean, the Isle of Man, I did it once, not my cup of tea, is all I can say. But banning it, nah. You see the pleasure it gives to so many people. The highs and lows there are massive, but the pleasure it gives to so many people, banning something is not an option for me. Working towards making it as safe as you possibly can, there are still things that can be done.
I'm sure, and it's a shame, isn't it? Because it hits the mainstream media only really due to the fact there's been so many deaths this year, and we all know that motorsport is dangerous, in particular motorcycle racing. But as you say, calls for it to be banned. I think there's a video on Crash at the moment explaining that, and how, if you're not a part of the motorcycle or motorsport world, you'll never truly understand just what an event this is and what it gives to not the people locally, but also the coming together of people as well. And I think a lot of the riders speaking out that, obviously it's incredibly sad what's happened, but everyone knows the risks and everyone takes part. No one's forced to do it, are they? They won't do it because they want to be there.
Having said that, when you are there and you see the absolute anguish that families are going through, I mean, John McGuinness is a fine example. 50 years old, did his 100th TT. Was he on his 103rd now TT? I can't remember how many tens of thousands of miles he said he did. Something like 50-odd thousand miles he's done around that racetrack. He got anguish on his face. But Rebecca, son Huewen, who was working on his Supersport bike, Maisie, daughter, they are going through hell. Rebecca, I saw her before he went out for the senior on Saturday. And I put my arm around her, and honestly, the stress was palpable, which must make it fantastic at the other side of things when you come out with whatever you come out with, a finish in the top half dozen or so. But when the ultimate accident happens, there's devastation. Those families. We had a situation in one of the sidecar where the two guys were one was badly injured, one was killed. And they apparently, and this is apparently, I have no verification of this, they apparently, as a tradition, swapped dog tags. So the guy who was killed, it was the press release that went out wasn't the guy that was killed. He was the one that was in hospital. So we even have a situation where, from a public relations point of view, if we shallow it out to a just PR, it was an absolute nightmare. The wrong guy was declared dead, and I can't imagine what that does to families, friends that are all trying to deal with the situation. It just compounds it into outer space, really, doesn't it? I think the TT, everybody I spoke to competing in it understands what's going on. You're right with what you say, Harry. None of them even lent towards, I don't know whether it's worth it. I never heard that once out of competitors. From a family point of view, I did. So there's the two sides of the fence that you're going to be sat on. How that plays out in the future, I don't know. From an organisational point of view, they've got to be seen now to be putting together a program of what else they can do to make it. They're never going to make it safe. There are always going to be people killed at the TT. Sorry to say that. That's a fact. I think they've only had one. When was the last time I can't remember the last time that they didn't have anybody killed in a racing incident. As far as the actual open roads are concerned, they've nailed that down fairly hard. You've never seen so many police in all your life on every part of the track, because that used to be the big issue. Fans were using the mountain road as fast as they can and flying off the side of the mountain and killing themselves. That's pretty much been nailed down. Yeah, there are still motoring accidents. Of course there are. There's a lot of people on the Isle of Man, but it's not quite as crazy as it used to be. So there's police everywhere. There's speed guns everywhere. You cannot do what you used to be. Mad Sunday, as it used to be known, where everybody could go flat out. No speed limits. There are no speed limits over the mountain anyway. But you've still got to ride and drive responsibly. But they've nailed it down. They've even got they have the Nürburgring, where the barrier comes up to let you out of the mountain sector, so no one can turn the wrong way and come the wrong way, which used to happen a lot. Suddenly you'd be buzzing around thinking you're on the racing line and there's a transit van in your way coming the wrong way. All of that's been ruled out for years now. Tell me where you want to go with this conversation, because the Isle of Man is so complex. Yeah. It is such a massive event. It's such an undertaking. Where else would you get a situation where the race because of the accident, the sidecar accident on the Friday, was before the senior race, so the senior ended up having to go on to the Saturday, and of course everyone's going home. The ferries are full, the flights are full, so all your marshals and the like, suddenly the 600 marshals that you need to actually cover the place, a fair sized proportion of those are already on boats on the way home. Already most of the fans are on their way home, because you can't suddenly put on a whole load more boats to put your motorbike on. They're all booked up through till Monday, Tuesday. If you've got to get home to go to work, and let's face it, that's most people, you've got to leave before the feature race is done. So there's all sorts of things that need to be thought through. I think that 3 years off, fantastic event. They really seem to have got a lot of things organised, but I think that there are going to be question marks, and there are going to be boxes that have to be ticked, just because that's the world we live in nowadays.
Certainly, and I think it's worth just saying, all our thoughts are with the friends and family of those who sadly passed away: Roger and Bradley Stockton, Mark Purslow, Davy Morgan, and César Chanal as well. But you're right, calls for it to be banned. That's not going to happen, and I think a lot of people would not want that either. But things certainly need to be done for next year, and done quickly and in a public light as well, I think, rather than just behind closed doors. But you touch on there, though, the popularity of the Isle of Man TT. Yes, it's been away a few years, so perhaps that has increased it even more so. But it's always been a historical event. People want to take part in it. People want to go to it. And alongside, I know we usually talk about MotoGP. We haven't even touched on that yet. And then you bring in World Superbikes as well into this equation too, which was at the weekend, and how popular that is at the moment. And the racing's brilliant. It's competitive. The grandstands are more or less, packed full. And you compare that to the likes of MotoGP Grand Prix weekends. And we've seen, in the last couple of weekends that, the stands haven't been that full, and it hasn't been perhaps as popular or as accessible as things like the Isle of Man, World Superbikes are. Why do you think that is at the moment? And what is it about the Superbikes, Isle of Man, that just brings out more people?
I'm sorry, Pete. Well, the Isle of Man is a festival. I think you go there one time and you want to go there again, because there's so much to it. There's so much to see. You can ride your bike around. You just have a wonderful week or a holiday or whatever it is. If you're into camping, great. There's lots of good campsites. You can play golf. You can meet up with all the superstars. They're all around. They're milling around everywhere. World Superbike, I think, have actually picked up on that. I mean, the Michael Hill paddock show, for instance. I mean, Michael Hill does a great job. I love Michael Hill. I mean, he really does. He does a fantastic job. It's in the middle of the paddock. All the fans are in the paddock. I mean, the throngs, the bike's riding through the throngs of fans to get to Parc Fermé this weekend in Misano. Just fantastic. I mean, real atmosphere. And that really enhances the on-site experience. And I think also it sucks people in when you're watching on TV. Sometimes you don't know why you're excited about a thing. You just are. You watch it on telly and you think, oh, I want to be there. Racing's been good this last couple of years as well. Rezgadioglu's had a lot to do with that, taking it to Jonathan Ray. And then there's, Alvaro Bautista that's a MotoGP refugee that's doing the business now. And are we likely to get, Davy was there at the weekend. I know Misano's only up the road from where he lives. So Andrea Dovizioso was there watching it. So you've got a few superstars that are coming in to watch it as well. So it's got a real dynamic about it at the moment, the World Superbikes. MotoGP, it's lost a bit of edge at the moment, I think. I think it has. I think that, Valentino Rossi is out. We're on a little bit of a dip at this minute in time with, prices of, the prices at Mugello were excruciatingly high for fans. They'll learn from that won't happen again. I'm bloody sure of it, because it was extremely expensive to get in there. And even for somewhere like Mugello, where you would have expected it to be absolutely rammed with atmosphere and people, it wasn't. So maybe there's a little bit of looking to laurels to do there as well in MotoGP. But all of these are like niches, aren't they? Isle of Man, a standalone classic traditional road race. Northwest 200 can be included in that, of course. Another fantastic event that was absolutely packed. And the other thing the Isle of Man have done well, one thing I didn't think there were that many people there when I went into Douglas. I only went out on a Thursday, but I didn't think there was that many people there. Normally Douglas has got, every square inch is covered by motorbikes. So what the Isle of Man have been quite clever at, they've used the whole of the island and distributed the fans all over the place. There's loads more places to stay and there's loads more places to action going on. It doesn't have to be just Douglas now. So they've been quite clever on that front, it would seem anyway. And then you've got World Superbike, and British Superbike, of course. I mean, you've got to put them in there as well. I mean, we've got really distinct marketplaces for all of these. It's quite clever how each and every one of them has developed that. And perhaps people have started to look away from MotoGP a little bit and started to think, well, we don't have to travel. COVID might have come into this as well. We don't have to travel out of Britain. We can go to a BSB round, and it's bloody good value, bloody good fun. World Superbikes, we've got them coming to Donington soon. It's going to be rammed. I think it will rival what's at Silverstone for the MotoGP. It's going to be very interesting how those two play off against each other this year in Britain.
And it is that idea of accessibility, isn't it, Pete, for things like that? These events are more accessible at the moment than MotoGP.
We saw that great crowd at the French Grand Prix, didn't we? Just a few races back. But it's looking like that was the exception, not the rule, wasn't it? I think we thought when that happened, we thought it's back to normal. We've got the big sellout crowd, but of course, this Quartararo is the reigning champion, and Zarco's up there as well. They're having a great season, and now we've seen the crowd, Mugello, as Keith has highlighted, dropping quite a lot, and it's going to be a concern because also for the circuits, they make their money from ticket sales. That's sort of the economic model, and if your crowd numbers are down by such big amounts, that's going to play into their own finances and how they view even having a MotoGP event, let alone on the fan side. As you say, there's plenty of other places that the fans can go to that are, let's face it looks like quite a lot cheaper. So I think, as Keith says, the Donington round coming up will be very interesting with all a lot of top British riders in Superbike. Superbike's always popular. And also on MotoGP side, these two events, Germany and Assen, usually big popular events. Assen on race day, you can almost guarantee will be sold out. I think it's 110,000 they're allowed in there. Will that happen? We'll find out. But I think these next two races could be a good indicator of the fan levels we're likely to see for the rest of this year.
Now
it'll come back with MotoGP. It is the premier class. I know everyone else gets the ump when you say that, but it is the premier class. It is the prototype class. It is the fastest. It is the best. There's no getting away from it. World Superbikes comes close, challenging as a spectacle and as an event, but it's still production-based motorbikes. Might give us everything we want as far as racing is concerned nowadays, but it's still, why is Formula One so interesting? It's because it's prototype, the pinnacle of innovation and engineering. And I think that's why it's probably, I'm not knocking Formula One, but, race day, anybody see Azerbaijan at the weekend? I know you will have done, Harry. It was boring as anything. And everyone still watches it. It still has huge numbers. It has huge, and since they've reintroduced it into social media, when good old Bernie, when he was in control, didn't allow any of that social media interaction. Now that we've got that side of things and they've caught up with the 21st century, it's peaking again. All of the motorbike classes are, from a racing perspective, more exciting. And yet Formula One is still the biggest draw for fans. So it's a really strange, how do you quantify what brings people, what attracts people to certain sports?
I'd like to see, if they're even available, which of course they won't be, but the numbers or the correlation between how many sort of people watched the MotoGP Amazon Prime documentary following last season, and if that has translated into any more viewers or eyes on, or anybody who might suddenly become a bit more interested in MotoGP. I wonder if that's worked or not.
I don't think to start with, I don't think it was as good as Drive to Survive, to be frank with you. I don't think it reached the markets that it was intended to reach quite so easily either. And it got binned for this year, which I think says quite a bit. And I think also in Formula One, most people were starved of that stuff behind the scenes, whereas I think we've always been a little bit better, a little bit more accessible in bikes, even in MotoGP. Certainly on social media and the like. So you kind of know our riders, our team people better than you did in Formula One until that kind of access was made available. Perhaps. That's just my take on it anyway.
Well, we'll see. Hopefully it does come back. I'm sure it will, because we've got lots to talk about. And if you're wondering why it took about 15 minutes to bring Pete in, it's because he's gone back to Thailand and his internet's a bit shoddy. So we're teetering around the subject. But Pete, the big news from MotoGP, well, I say big news, confirmed what everybody was highly suspicious of. Jack Miller to KTM, confirmed, deal done.
It is, yes. As you say, I mean, Keith called it a few podcasts back. It's been highly rumoured, and he signed on the dotted line. So, yeah, after 5 years, I think it is, at Ducati, he'll be moving on. His third manufacturer, he started at Honda. On paper, you wouldn't say the KTM is as competitive as the Ducati. Obviously, it looked like his place at the factory team had gone, but it seemed like there was an option at Pramac. He's chosen to go the factory KTM route. I think probably it looks like a detail, maybe to some, but quite significant is the fact it's a 2-year deal. Jack's been running these 1-year deals for a long time now. I think pretty much since that original Honda contract, every deal has been a 1-year deal. And he's mentioned a few times he was a little bit sick of it, that every season he would start not knowing where he's going to be the next year. And that means negotiations pretty much from about round 2 or 3 are underway. That you won't have to worry about now, at least for next year. So I think that probably played a bit of a part. He's going to have a challenge. We know that the KTM is not as consistent. It's a race-winning bike on its day, but the consistency is lacking, isn't it? On the other hand, Jack has been known to have maybe tyre wear has been a bit of an issue for him. The KTM seems pretty good on that. You look at how Brad Binder rides. He's strong at the end of races. So it could suit Jack in that way. And I think exciting times. Red Bull will love to have him. KTM will love to have him. He's always riding off-road bikes. So for all of those guys, he was with KTM in Moto3, of course. So it's sort of a reunion in a way. And I'm sure they're very pleased to have his name on their books for next year.
Looks like Bagnaia is going to miss him as well, judging by some of the stuff that's come out of the team over the last week. And Bagnaia was quite sad to see him go, because he is quite a personality, Jack, isn't he? He's a good guy to have around. There's no doubt about that. And that will lift the team. The other KTM rumour at the moment coming from the paddock is that Pol Espargaro for Tech 3. I've been hearing little rumbles about the possibility of him going back to Tech 3, which is slightly interesting.
Well, of course, they also offered Miguel Oliveira the chance to go to Tech 3, which he turned down. But I'm now thinking, are they not happy with Remy Gardner and Ralph Fernandez then? What happens to those two? Rookie year, they're doing, I imagine, and it looks like they're doing the best with what they can.
Yeah, well, I think that's change happens, though, doesn't it? And a change is as good as a rest. And so there might be a bit of a rejigging going on. Experience also counts to some extent in a team. And I think that Tech 3 didn't have that MotoGP experience, perhaps, rider-wise, that they might have liked to have had. So Pol Espargaro going back there, he's not really made the best of the Honda deal. So it's interesting as well. Lynn Jarvis there's a few quotes floating around at the moment. Lynn Jarvis, I mean, he's mega impressed with the way that Aprilia have managed to do what they do. But more than that, like we all are, mega impressed with Aleix Espargaro, the way, someone that is a bit, what's the word? I'm going to use the word flaky. You can never really be sure what you're going to get from Aleix some of the time. He's fast, no doubt about that, certainly over one lap. But This year, he has properly stepped up. And it's, the teams around the paddock are taking a great deal of notice of what Aprilia have managed to achieve and what Aleix has managed to do with himself to get to where he is. But of course, now they've not got concessions and they've got a satellite team coming for 2023. That has just increased the engineering and workload, personnel load, hugely. So it'll be interesting to see how Aprilia, as a small factory, manage that. And that is going to make a massive difference to how they perform.
It certainly will. And Pete, we've just had before we come on to looking at Germany this week, we've just had the Catalan test, of course. And when we last spoke, it was just beginning. It's now done and dusted and over. What have we learned from that? Has there been any big talking points to come out of that? What can we look forward to for this weekend?
The main thing really was aerodynamic parts. There was a lot of those seen. In KTM's case, if we start with them, as we were just speaking about them, they sort of retested their previous fairing. They're one of only two teams, along with Yamaha, that have used their update already for this season. And their update was really just taking off the side pods. But for both teams, that's what they did. So they went for a sort of a lower downforce setting, hoping it would give them a bit more top speed. Now, in KTM's case, they did that because it sort of put them more in line with their package, their aerodynamic package of last year. And it meant that they could sort of use last year's information a bit more in terms of the setup and things like that, because it seemed like they were having some difficulties getting the bike to work in the way that it had last year. At tracks that it went well at last year hasn't gone so well this year. So that's why they made that change. Yamaha, on the other hand, they sort of took the side pods off to try and give Quartararo this top speed he so badly needs for places like, at Mugello. But Quartararo didn't like it. It turned out that what he gained on the straight, which wasn't very much, he lost more than that in the corners. Went back to the old standard version for the race, the side pods and the front wing, and almost won, didn't he? I mean, 0.6 of a second, he was there. And on a Ducati track like that was a great result for him. And he said after the test, he said, look, I'm not going to use that again. I'm not going back to the old one. He will stick with the four-wing setup, if you like, for the rest of this season. The other teams, on that point, you might say, well, really, if Yamaha, with hindsight, if they'd waited until this test to try this update, it would have given them the chance to realize, well, you know what, this isn't going to make that much difference. We can work on something else. Too late now. They've introduced it. Even just taking the side pods off, that counts as an update. So they've introduced, for KTM and Yamaha, that's been done. The other teams, they've still got their one roll of the dice, their one joker card to play on that. So they were a lot of teams trying aerodynamic parts, hoping to find usually traction or cornering, in Honda's case, trying to get some grip back and things like that. So there was a lot of aerodynamics on display. Even the little F1 wing on the back of the Aprilia that first appeared on Savadori's bike, I think that got another showing. Whether we'll see that in a race weekend, who knows? They claim it does work. It does give a bit of downforce under the first initial touch of braking, just helps to keep the rear tyre on the ground. So we'll see. But other than that, it was general test work. Teams working on setups. KTM, I think there was a chassis. Honda had a chassis. They gave Pol Espargaro the parts that Taka Nakagami had. Keith mentioning Pol Espargaro's future, of course. That decision to give Taka Marc Marquez's parts. I mean, people are seeing that pretty clearly as, well, Pol's not going to be here next year. There are other rumours that he might have an offer from Honda, somewhere at Honda, but yeah, definitely the rumour is there's an offer at KTM. There's also still this rumour that's just sort of never really gone away about might some sort of gas entry take over that Suzuki spot. Could that happen in some way? So a rebranded KTM bike. Who knows? But definitely Pol is being linked with KTM. He went well on that bike. It suited his style. And it seems like KTM hiring Jack, they're looking back towards experience, aren't they? They went at a time with a lot of young riders. And now maybe they're thinking that they do need a bit of experience. So somebody that knows the bike well, I mean, it'd be no harm for them having Pol back. But just back to the testing. So Quartararo was fastest from Pecco Bagnaia. Quartararo pretty much fastest all of the day. Aleix, after his huge mistake on the Sunday, he was one of the first out on track. So he was really signalling he wanted to put that behind him. And where was it? Fourth on the timesheets behind Zarco. So the Aprilia guys were up there. Miller was sixth behind Pol. So Pol did do well. He tried the new swing arm that he didn't get to try on the race weekend. So agreed with Nakagami, not a night and day difference, but he said, 1/10 can put you up a row on the grid. So, we could see Pol try it this weekend. That'd be interesting to see if he does fit into the bike. But that was sort of in a nutshell.
And also, just on that, it came out a couple of weeks ago, but we didn't touch on it. Pete, MotoGP, the rear tyre choices have been reduced to 2 options for each event next year. Currently, the different tyre options are soft, medium, and hard for use at each race weekend. 3. How significant is that, and why has that come about?
I think it seems to have come about by there were tyres that were not being used, so basically to cut down on the waste. Now, obviously, I suppose just to be clear on this doesn't mean these are the same 2 tyres or 3 tyres, as is the case now, that come to every race. Michelin pick 3 tyres from a selection pool of their rear tyres. They will pick 3 of them, a soft, medium, and hard. And next year they'll only pick 2. Now the teams have agreed to this, so that's fair enough. But it does just narrow the window, and it makes. We've seen some teams such as KTM that might only, we see in the tyre selection sheet, they'll start the race as the only guys on the hard front, for example. Now, let's say that, okay, we're talking rear tyres here, but if that situation happens with the rear and that hard rear is no longer there, and the choice is effectively a soft and medium, that's going to be difficult for those guys. So it does just narrow that window, doesn't it? And it means that teams are going to really want to be spot on with their setup, because they're not going to be able to rely on trying to use the tyre to fix their problems. They're going to have to fix the problems with the bike setup.
There's a massive crossover, though, in the overlap of compounds in Michelin, whereas there wasn't previously in previous tyre manufacturers. So you've got quite a lot of crossover, and that's why we have sometimes all 3 compounds of tyres in a race, because there is that crossover between them. So I can see quite a bit the reason why. And of course, Michelin will update how those compounds operate, how they work as well. And we will have a new robust protocol for tyre pressures. There we go, back there to that. Next year, there will be a universal across all of the MotoGP teams tyre pressure data download and monitoring system that will be robust in its security, so no one can cheat it or do anything untoward with it. That will be in 2023. It was supposed to be this year, but they didn't quite get there with the software, whatever they needed to get it so that it was secure. Unlike there are in Moto 2, for instance, or even Moto E, I think, has got a good tyre pressure system as well that's across the board. But MotoGP will be up to speed in 2023. So all these things combined will make it a little bit tighter, the tyre package, and saving money at the end of the day. Anybody who's not been in a MotoGP paddock and seen the massive container loads of tyres that get shipped from one place to the next, there's a fair bit of shipping there.
A fair bit of shipping indeed, I'm sure. Right, look ahead to this weekend, shall we? And we're back racing in MotoGP. Keith, Germany, the Sachsenring is back. And, of course, with Marc Marquez absent, we will get a different winner for the first time since 2012 in 10 years.
Yeah, this is like Texas Mark II, isn't it, Sachsenring, when it comes to Marc Marquez. Great racetrack, but a little bit dangerous. Comes back into the situation where, you look at I think it's turns 4 and 5. It's all a bit close. Funny enough, I seem to have it rattling around the back of my head. Aleix Espargaro, who I will be getting right up there when we get to our predictions in a minute, because I think this is going to work quite well for the Aprilia. But I remember Aleix going in, I think, at 4, which is, even the paddock is split because the paddock isn't big enough to have everyone in one place. So hospitality is on a different level to the main garages and trucks. It's an awkward place to get around, to work around for everybody, from the media to right the way through. And you're on the side of the tyre for an enormous amount of time, on the left-hand side of the tyre as well. So it's old school, East German, super beer drinking, out at night, fun and games, lots of noise, lots of people. Great.
You've sold it for me.
Fun.
I'm there. You've sold it.
Yeah, you actually, I got to say, young or old, and me and you are at bottom ends, each end of that scale, Harry. It is actually really, really good fun. I do enjoy going to Sachsenring, but the track is borderline dangerous now for MotoGP. The velocity of motorbikes has increased to such an extent into out of a corner speed and the like, that the runoff in a couple of places isn't really good enough. If you start to get into the history of things, this is where I used to love traveling with Julian Ryder when you go to places like East Germany, because he would tell you about the war. Not that he was in it, but of course he kind of studied it, and where this was made and that was made, and where Degner and the rest of them were for CZ, bloody and MZ over there, and so on and so forth. And then you drive down a road outside, and there's a little memorial with one rider that was, departed us at that particular turn on the old course. And history absolutely oozing out of the fields there. Love going there. It's one. I think there's only one track really. I think I've said to you that I'm not really that keen on going to, out of all of them. But
which one was that?
It is unique. It is unique. I mean, it's one of those places that if you absorb the history of bike sport and absorb the region that you're in, at each track, you can spend easily a week to 10 days in an area just sucking it all up. It's fantastic.
Give Keith Le Mans or Sachsenring, and you know which one he's going to be attending.
I mean, Le Mans one of the most successful this year from a spectator point of view, and it's got to be on the calendar. But it's not my favourite. That is true.
Pete, what do you make of the Sachsenring there? It's hard to disagree with what Keith said about it's become most GP has a little bit outgrown it by the looks of things, really, just in terms of sheer size. But hopefully we'll get some good racing.
Yeah, it's definitely a unique track. Shortest one on the calendar, and as Keith says, you wouldn't believe it to look at it as you pull up that. Oh, that's the track. It's squeezed. It's not only a short track; it's squeezed into a small space. It's almost like it's in a sort of a multi-story car park type layout. It's where you have a sort of the upper part, and then they drop down the waterfall corner, and they do a few more, and then they come back up to the start again. So yeah, very unique. Everything backs onto itself, as Keith says. So that, again, that's the problem with runoff. They can't make it bigger because it's there's another part of the track just the other side of the barriers. So they're very limited for space. But it's always it's for spectators, they get a great view, and it's always a popular round, as for reasons Keith was saying. And as you were saying, Harry, it's been Marc Marquez's territory since even before he was in MotoGP. He was winning on Moto2, 125, and everything else, and that emotional win a year ago, his first since the accident and breaking his arm. It was it's been a great track for him, but as you say, this year all changed. So really, it's we're starting from a blank sheet of paper, because most people on the grid will not have been at a German Grand Prix that hasn't been won by Marc Marquez.
It's going to be it's going to be an exciting one. I think I'm quite excited for it. I don't know why, in particular for Sachsenring. Maybe it's because I've now leveled with points in our predictions tally with Pete, because after last weekend, Keith still leads the way with 10 points, but Pete and I are tied with 7, because despite Aleix finishing one lap early, I still had Zarco on the podium for last time, and that picked me up an extra point. And that leads us nicely on then, gents, to predictions for this weekend. 1, 2, 3. Who you got? Who you going for? Who should we go for first? Keith, you've had a bit more time to think. You can have it first.
Who's going first?
Keith.
Me. Oh, bloody hell. Thanks for that, Harry.
I thought you haven't spoken in about 5 minutes, so you've had more time to think.
Hey, that don't make me any better. I'm actually gonna go for an Aprilia.
For the win?
Yeah.
Oh.
I'm gonna go for a Aleix for the win.
Okay. Making up for last time.
Well, I think that it's going to be a tyre war, I think, there as well. It'll be very interesting to see who manages to keep tyres in that left-hand side of the tyre there is like a nightmare. I feel like I want to go with Bastianini, but the fact of the matter is the last 2 rounds he's done nothing at. What a nightmare one this is to predict. Mind you, they all are.
Every time, every weekend.
Just chuck it all in the air. Okay, I'm going to have Aleix Espargaro for winning here. That's pretty bold anyway. Bastianini and Binder.
Oh, okay.
How rare is that?
A KTM.
That'll be Brad, by the way.
Yeah. Well, the way Darren's been riding at the moment, if it all goes wrong, you never know. Well, go on, Pete. Then
good call.
Who you got, Pete?
Well, you were mentioning the last race, Harry. I mean, I had the front row predicted, And
did.
I had Aleix, Bagnaia, Quartararo. So I'm thinking I'm on for this could be a podium sweep. And then what happens? Bagnaia's off at turn 1. Aleix throws it away. I felt like Rivola walking back to the pits with his head in his hands. But so with that in mind, I am going for the same 3, and I'm out for redemption this week. They're going to pay me back. So yeah, I'm also going to stick with the Aleix win that I had predicted for the previous one. I'm going to go with Keith on that. I'll go Bagnaia second, and I'll go Quartararo third.
Okay, all right.
I think it's a very safe, unsporting bet.
I made my gamble last week, and you saw what happened. Yeah,
everything that could have gone wrong did go wrong. I'm going for a Quartararo win. I think I'm going to have Aleix on the podium as well. He's been on my podium prediction for the last 4 races, and so far it's come true. But I think he's going to do second, and I'm going to go for my man Zarco to steal the final spot on the podium. Ran well last time out. He's of course in Sachsenring. I think he was on pole last time and took the podium last year in Germany, if my memory serves me well. So good form around there. And if it goes his way, it might be a Zarco on the podium. So that's who I'm going for.
I got a feeling I'm going to get a good hiding this week.
To be fair, if that's your podium, Aleix Espargaro, Bastianini, and Binder, that would be a great podium. I think that would be everyone would just be really happy with that podium. I think. So it's tight in the leaderboard as well. I'll tell you what, I've improved from last year. I think I was on 0 points still. So here we go. I can predict a little bit better. Predict the unpredictable. Okay, well that does it, gents. All we have left to do is let the race unfold in a few days' time. Make sure, in the meantime, you're tuned in across crash.net for all the latest news and analysis as ever across the week in the build-up. And then we'll be back, as usual, next week to discuss it all. Get your questions in, leave them in the comments section, or tweet, Instagram or Facebook us. Just search Crash MotoGP. Please do leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts as well. And we'll see you right back here next week. But from myself, Keith and Pete, it's bye-bye.